Welcome back to Test Prep 202, the verbal section. So far, we've covered the basics in my rather long introduction. I mentioned the importance of figure matrices, especially if you're just learning how to coach for the cognitive skills test. We dissected one verbal type question, which I think is enough. They're pretty much all the same to me. We looked at a short-term strategy, and in this section, I'm going into the longer-term strategy. I'd like to issue a warning, a disclaimer about what's going to follow. I had to take the GRE at one point after college, and I was scared of the verbal section because it wasn't what I studied. So I made 3,600 flashcards because there were 3,600 words in my enormous test prep book. Ended up with a 99.6 on the verbal section, which was an absolute riot. I loved it so much. I did the same thing with German, and I did the same thing with French to make up time on my 2-hour commute each day. And I think I'd be an etymologist, except it doesn't pay very much and it has nothing to do with math. So anyway, this might be a little bit over the top, but here we go. Ages 0 to 3. As I mentioned in the introduction, you're spending like 13,000 quality hours with your child from 0 to 3. And it could really be the difference between a genius at the end of that or a lot of closing the gaps in test prep afterwards. I know baby talk is vital to learning how to pronounce words. If you don't do baby talk for at least the first, 6 to 9 months, your child's going to have speech therapy. In fact, that's common with the third child who has 2 older, brilliant siblings. By age 3, though, it should be all big sentences. You should use a lot of detail and repetition repeatedly, and as you push your kid around with the stroller, it should be a constant, almost adult-level narrative. Make sure they get every word 100 times. I've seen parents do this. It's been in research, but when you see it, it's absolutely amazing what happens. We didn't do this. Whatever. We all know you read to your child incessantly. Try to build working memory. Working memory at this age is going to come from reading to, and it's going to come from a multi-clausal sentence. In fact, in those multi-clausal sentences, never say cat when you could say tall brown cat. In fact, the whole first section of shape, size, and color count is essentially tall brown cat on steroids. And when you read, of course, you're asking, you're discussing, you're giving the child plenty of latitude to be part of the conversation and think. Which brings us to age 4, and this is really where formal learning begins. Keep Read 2 going. The best time to stop Read 2 is somewhere after high school, because during Read 2, there's an adult level discussion that can take place, and when your child is reading on their own all the time, they miss that. That might actually be one of the reasons why really strong readers, the kids who read 6 hours a day, really struggle with the COGAT and other cognitive skills tests until about 3rd or 4th grade. And then they're permanently smarter than the rest of us. Of course, this motivated pre-K phonics, conceptual vocabulary, and thinking. And let me just describe what was behind that whole thing. Essentially, I had to create it because I wanted a phonics course that didn't cost $250, that didn't have a bunch of lame books, 1/10 the quality of the stack I brought home from the library every day, that has words with high cognitive load necessary for test prep, for cognitive skills growth, and the phonetic range of my child, which you'd be surprised how many I found because I wrote software to do it. Because this book covers 0 through 2nd grade phonics. Oops, misspelled. And I'm not going to need another one after this. And as far as the test is concerned, this is more than enough for 99%. And the reason why we didn't have to spend as much time in the verbal section, at least for the child who took it. Okay, in addition to that, shape, size, color, count with kindergarten math as a follow-up is essentially what I call whole language math. I mean, they're not doing division or decimals at that point. They're basically characterizing their world physically. And this physical math vocabulary is a real stepping stone toward the abstract vocabulary that's going to follow if you do it right. And of course, figure matrices, and verbal analysis naturally follows from figure matrices because it's just the same thing with a lot more going on. Phonics is an awesome time to start the word board, which, whoops, I described in my last video. It's right there. And as I also mentioned, don't use the word board as them running through 20 words very quickly. They're the CIO of Learning Inc., and you're the board of directors, and grill them. And in my blog, I mentioned a while back, there's a lot more that comes out of that than just them learning to think on their feet. There's decisiveness, and eventually you're actually grooming someone who could be a CEO. But enough on that. And in my case, in Math House, where I'd rather spend my time looking at the prime number theory I'm developing, as opposed to sitting there having a conversation with a kid, this allowed me to make up for my lack of talking. Okay, moving on. Age 5. Kindergarten math is the best math book your child will ever get for the rest of their lives, maybe until graduate school. It's rich in language. It's especially Sylvan. It has a lot to do with cognitive content, and unfortunately, once they hit first grade, cognitive content is just zapped out of math. Vocabulary Workshop, which I've mentioned many times, I think I've got some copies here, is awesome. And it's not just awesome because kids love it. And it's not just awesome because it's going to help you take the word rock, which needs to go on the vocabulary or the word board because you found it in the book. But then you dig into science and add gravel, stone, brick, etc. And then you're on to classifications and analogies in a very thorough way. But there's an even better part, which is as the kid is going through here and doing exercises, and I especially see this, excuse me while I dig through my stack of books. The format of these questions for kids, especially something like this, you can't even see it, this, where they have to take 10 words and match them up with 10 definitions, or they have a pick list on most question types. At least in the case of my kids, they just want to get it done. And in the process of just wanting to get it done, they build test-taking skills that are just amazing. And they do it at a young age naturally. Laziness is an enormous motivator for kids to pick up cognitive skills. From a math perspective, you could start everyday math. It's all about number sense. I love that course, especially the second grade course. You can skip the first grade course. But you're just on the process to math at that point. So let's move on to age 6. This is a great time. Well, actually, age 5 we did at least the first half of building thinking skills for the second and third grade and meandered through it. The second half, which is all verbal, is more age appropriate for the high achievers or those who are aspiring to be a high achiever. So we always had a building thinking skills laying around with the second half that we never got to. And it's possible that from a verbal perspective, if you're already doing the word board, this might be the best book out there. Part 2 is all vocabulary, as I mentioned. Keep doing vocabulary workshop. I should mention my kids also did Worldly Wise 3000 at school, so we had both of these going on. And after probably second or third grade, they'd see a word and they were so used to the routine they would memorize it on the spot. We actually dropped the word board for vocabulary and just kept it around as needed for science. Test prep, I say it's synergistic. What I really mean by that is if you take time off of academic work, right, the type of curriculum you'd see at school, and you just do hardcore test prep, you will find if your kid takes, let's say your kid takes 6 months off and never sees another math problem again and comes back, you will find your kid is so far ahead and can develop and can pick up the book and do it on their own with no help, even if that book skips a year. I'm a big fan of test prep for that reason. And I also want to mention, this is a good time to start introducing reading comp. I like this book from Continental Press. This is actually Level E because Level E is 5th grade. For a 5th grader, this is hard, okay? And from a test prep perspective, if you give a 2nd grader, say a 3rd or 4th grade reading comp question, even if you have to read it to them, that is a great proxy for the whole environment of a test, which is there's a lot going on. I don't know what's going on. I've got all these words. I have to figure out the meaning. I don't even know the meaning. And no matter how they do, I feel like they came out of it with the same experience they're going to come out of the test with. So reading comp, I'm not sure it's necessarily good practice for the verbal section of a cognitive skills test. I think it's good practice for learning how to sit through something grueling for a little while. Okay, then we move on to ages 7 to 10. Okay, when people specifically ask me about 3rd and 4th grade, really what I'm saying is I already told you everything to do. You just have to up the ante and pick up books that are more age appropriate. As I mentioned before, we got Worldly Wise. We'd already been doing vocabulary workshop. After a while, it got easy. But we've been in the United States since birth. If I just showed up and I'm from, name the country, because I now have a job in the United States and I bring my family over here, and I've got 6 months before the test, I think I would do U.S. vocabulary immersion and do both Worldly Wise and vocabulary workshop if that's what it took. I'd like to mention in test prep math level 2 and 3, at one point I almost said that those first 100 word problems were good for 99% on any test of any type. There's not a lot of vocabulary happening in there. It's an enormous amount of wordplay and word logic. The kids who've done either of these books have said they've never seen anything in school that's as hard as that from a thinking perspective. In fact, after test prep math level 3, we took a little bit of time off and we went right into SAT. And I was thinking just do the math section, but what I found out when we got to the high school level reading comp, it was as convoluted or nearly as complicated as what I put in test prep math level 2 and 3, which I didn't do on purpose, by the way. I want to have an aside on writing because I get a lot of questions on this. Writing before middle school, okay, it's art of all kinds. It's Minecraft architecture. It's stop motion videos with maybe Legos or your dolls. Inventing plays, commercials, songs, poems, even if the child doesn't write it down. It's any creative creation of their own creations. That sets up a writer if that's what you want to do. Now, if you add all of the wordplay and the vocabulary to that, at some point, maybe middle school, maybe high school, they'll decide that it's just as fun to sit there and write their song or poem as to make it up and sing it, and you've got a writer. And that brings us to age 12, as I already mentioned. This book is the first edition, I think, of the College Board's own version of SAT test prep for their own test, because the College Board publishes that test. They don't have this on the market anymore. I've been getting copies off of eBay for future use. And the reason I like it so much is because it's easy. It would be embarrassing for a college student to use this. But for kids on their way through middle school, I think this would be a really great starting point for them. But again, it's not related to COGAT. It's certainly not related to the verbal section, only marginally. Okay, so that's it. I've gone through 4 parts of verbal. You're probably thinking that's a 4-part introduction. Why don't you do some videos on, I don't know what. You tell me. Do we need to go through the different types? Do I need to explain this any further? And I'd be certainly happy to do so if you let me know. But for now, I am the author of www.getyourchildintoGAT.com. If you got any questions or suggestions for what comes next, post them to the blog. Thank you very much.